create your very first SOP, or hopefully optimize one that you've already created. And there's a couple of resources I'll share at the end of this training, but for the most part, what we want to do is we want to understand what to include inside of an SOP and what not to include, some of the more tactical elements of writing an SOP. What we really want to do is create a Google for your business. Ultimately, and I'll talk about some of the benefits of why that's important and why I call it a Google for your business down here in a second. But what we want to do is just centralize information and de-frictionalize the way that things get created in the business from an SOP perspective, because ultimately when I sit down with agencies who are just kind of starting out here, we hear a lot about, everything comes from the founder, everything's founder led, or everything is president led. And what we want to do is we want to create some autonomy within the team to be writing processes and creating processes on their own, right? Because that's kind of how we build. And again, that's one of the reasons why Google's been so successful. Problem is a lot of businesses have no clear processes. And the fact of the matter is maybe it's because they're still in flux, they're still growing, they're trying to figure out what exactly their core process even is. And so if that's you, that's totally okay. I can tell you about some mechanisms that we use for agencies in that bucket. They likely have messy tools and organization, meaning that we don't know where to find stuff and we don't know how to find the answers to our questions. And even maybe our project management, like rules of engagement, isn't exactly set up. And this isn't a workshop on project management, but sometimes when we have really clear procedures, things like how to set up a brand new project when we get a new client becomes a little bit more streamlined and things just start to become more uniform. And then here, the third bucket, everything's urgent and custom. Super messy place to be in, because if everything is urgent and everything is custom, we're reinventing the wheel. We're losing a lot of money here because everything seems like it takes 2x longer, because it does in fact take 2x longer when that's the truth. So the big promise here, what we want to do is create a system for documentation. We want to create some repeatable outcomes, meaning that what's going to happen. When you get a new client, we kind of have this stack of things that's going to happen. It helps you capacity plan. It helps you with quality control, generating new business, all of those things. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sure, especially in the beginning of your agency, or maybe you're going through this now, you've got that kind of seesaw of feast or famine months. We want to make sure that as we are creating a more consistent business, we're kind of eliminating some of that drag and really kind of padding the bottom line. And then additionally, the third big thing is that we're going to create some alignment between team members. It's super useful, especially if you're running a virtual team, to have a centralized location for all company information. That way, if somebody leaves or someone goes out on maternity leave, or if somebody ascends into a new position and they need, to fill their new role, you have a new person coming in. We have all of the information centralized so that they know where to look, what they're actually going to need to be doing, and all of those things. Let's dive right in. The three really big factors that we're going to talk about here today that include some super impactful documentation is here, this assessment loop. We're going to talk about documentation, or the screencast method, and the metrics that you can use to support you. Super simple. We don't want to overcomplicate this. My goal is to have you bring this back into your business and be able to, with the lowest barrier of entry, begin to create content with your team and alongside your team. This is the assessment loop. In my opinion, there is basically a three kind of overlapping system that basically shows us how you're operating, right? So you've got your people, you've got your systems, and you've got your processes. And people obviously is your team, your coaches, clients, etc., right? You've got your systems. So this is your technology, right? Your automation, and then your process, your how-tos, your IP, or your strategy. What usually happens is we've got the founder right here in the middle, right? They're managing the team. They're redoing the systems and setting up the project management tool. They are communicating how to, right? For the most part, this part, right, doesn't exist. We're in a position where every single piece of everything is custom. And so what we really want to do is we want to make sure that we can basically eliminate you from the middle here and create a frictionless way to allow the people to interact with the systems, and the systems to inform the process, and the people to understand the process itself, right? This comes by way of training, people and systems. This comes by way of setup, and then processes and systems just become a way of technology and automation. For the most part, we want to create just a constant assessment of how is this going, right? Are our people trained on our systems? Do our systems adhere to our process? Is our process clear to our people? What pieces are manual? What pieces are automated? all of those things. And ultimately, right, this is, again, somewhat unsexy, but the results are really great because when everybody's speaking the same language, the founder ends up not in the center of all of the things that are happening behind the scenes. They don't get asked a million questions. They don't get pulled into things. I don't know about you, but I mean, I've learned a really long time ago that decision fatigue is an actual real thing. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is if you're met with the decision to either jump in or let your team handle it, or jump in or let your team handle it, because this isn't functioning well, you're going to be faced with the difficult decision of, oh, I could just do this on my own in half the time or whatever it is. And the funny thing is this is a fun exercise brought to you by my friend and partner, Dan Martell. He basically says that if you are really intentional about this buyback rate, which I'll show you how it works here in a second, you'll understand that your company is actually spending more money for you to do this. So you're costing your money, or you're costing your business more money to be in some of this weeds of fulfillment. And so he has this really interesting thing called the buyback rate. Basically what it is how much your company pays you divided by 2,000 hours. That's for the entire year, including a 2-week vacation, divided by 4, because he wants you to get a 4x return on your investment here. So let's just say, for example, you make $80K a year over 2,000 hours, that's $40 an hour. And so you would be basically outsourcing some of those tasks for $10 an hour, right? My opinion, and I don't know if I differ with Dan perhaps on this, but my opinion is that especially if this work is not fulfilling to you and you can ascend into a higher level role and pay yourself more in the organization, I'd be cool with a one-to-one trade here. I do the same thing in my organization. I say, if I really don't like this task and it decreases my energy and I really don't like doing it, it really does make sense for me to get this off my plate at my true buyback rate versus the 4x investment. Now, if you're doing things like data entry and setting up automations in Zapier and project managing and doing your schedule and scheduling your calls and things, onboarding clients, like this is for sure a 10 to 40, like you could for sure get this off of your plate with a really solid admin for about $20 an hour. The longer you wait, the more this obviously accrues in terms of how much it's costing your agency to get these things off of your plate. So I think if you haven't done some of this work, or you can't just do really quick back of the napkin math, how much your company pays you divided by 2,000 hours is really your buyback rate, right? To do a one-to-one trade for your time and what you're spending in the business. Let's talk about the screencast method. So I really want to have you take a look at this thing called the traffic light system. So when I go through a week and I have a really challenging week and I just feel really drained, I do this exercise in that event. So when I have a really stressful week, or at least once a quarter, where I take a look at my week of tasks and calls and all the things that I've done, I do a really quick time study and I say, okay, here's where I'm spending my most time. Does this give me energy or does this detract energy? And can I use the traffic light system to code my work? And so how I want you to do this is take a look at red. So we want to delegate this, yellow, document, and green, to do. And the reason I make these 3 different colors is because red is delegate, means I'm not doing this and it's already created, right? Like I have a process for this, everything's good. This absolutely should not be on my list. And that's what we all like to call the proverbial low-hanging fruit, right? We could get this right off of our task list. Yellow is the documentation stage, because maybe we want to delegate this, but we haven't quite found a way how to do it, or maybe we haven't nailed down the process yet. And that's going to be the biggest thing to pull into kind of this next phase. And then the green is just the stuff that you have to do, or the things that you really like doing on your calendar and in your kind of week that you're crafting here. And we want to make sure that we are staying kind of in the green zone, and that nothing that you have on your plate, you have somebody else on the team who's capable of doing that. Or if you want to get it off of your plate, we need to make sure it's highlighted yellow so that we can document it and think through the process and go through this. The screencast method really just is how to fold your time. So when you have your list of things that are highlighted yellow or the things that are highlighted red, the biggest thing that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, if this is happening in any given week, can I just record my screen? You'll want to get something like loom.com. Honestly, this is the biggest muscle in my business that I have grown over the years, is that every single time I'm like, I'm doing something, that I probably shouldn't be doing into the future, even if I don't have a person on my team to be able to take over that task, I still record my screen, I still get a process documented. And then that way, when somebody comes in, I have everything I need to give them to be successful on day one. It also has helped me decrease the training time for all my new hires exponentially, because I'm not spending one-on-one time, or my leadership team isn't spending one-on-one time sitting down with this person, reinventing the wheel, explaining things differently. They're not missing steps. We've got everything kind of compiled into our Google for our business. And then include some completion filters. This is really, really helpful, because what we like to do, and I love that book, Measure What Matters by John Doerr. He talks about like having key results and measuring those. And so ultimately, a lot of agency owners ask me, they say like, well, how do I know my team is using the processes? And why am I just creating all of this information if nobody's going to access it? Ultimately, what we want to do is when we create a process, we want to have the definitions of done or those completion filters created so that we can either check a box or report a number or take a look at a key metric or a definition of done. When this is set up properly, what can I now see, right? And so make sure when you're recording your screen that you're showing, right, what exactly definition of done looks like, what exactly is important to remember or keep top of mind. So dictate a lot while you're doing your screen recordings. And one of the reasons why Google is so successful is because it's a centralized hub for information that pretty much anybody can access, but it's also contributed to from multiple angles, right? From multiple contributors all over the world. If we create this system and we only use it for the founder, it becomes another founder-led bottleneck that dies off as the founder is able to focus their attention on other things. These are all things that you can be doing to assess your time and to be able to build this muscle for your calendar and your purposes. But what we also want to do is build this for our team, right? Especially our leadership team or our management team. If we're paying some folks higher dollar per hour rates, or we have some folks on salary, we want to make sure that their time is used really, really valuably as well. And so this is the easiest way also that I've seen like utilization rate go up in an agency. We're able to focus more on our specific lane and stay in our specific lane around some of the work that we're doing. And we really want to have our team assess their week and say, hey, listen, you hired me for client management, but I too do a ton of data entry. What automations or what team members can we pass some of the stuff off to so that I can, get my time back and also be able to pour a little bit more love into our clients? You'll see retention rates skyrocket. You'll see bottom line become a little bit more attractive. We want to be able to centralize the way and come up with a clear way to centralize what is in people's brains and then create a system for how they learn how to do that. The most expensive thing that you're going to spend money on in your business or in your agency at large is going to be people. It's going to be really expensive. And unfortunately, what ends up happening with a lot of agencies, at least who come to me like very frazzled and very upset, is that they'll say, oh yeah, well, my account manager left, or my lead web designer left. Out went all that information with that person. And if we can build a process culture of like collecting this information and what works really well, we can kind of people proof our business in a way that makes a lot of information accessible to pretty much anybody, right? If one YouTube channel falls off or one blog falls off of Google, I can probably find like 9 more blogs of the same topic that have like pretty similar types of information. And the only reason that's possible is because of the contributors. So build your hive mind, right? Have the people in your organization really feeding into this, right? So like if you have you and your team kind of pouring in, you have a collection of information that exists and not just something that's coming from your brain. It also appeals to several different types of learning styles. So this is super important to create documents that have really, really clear walkthroughs, really clear completion filters, and that aren't just founder created, that we have multiple different types of videos and screencasts and documents that are prepared by several different members of your team. Now let's talk about metrics. I think ultimately what ends up happening when we create some of these things is we start to just create just to create. And that's why I think ultimately people stop doing it for a really long time, is because, if we walked into the gym and our goal was to lose weight, but we didn't exactly track where we started or where we want to go or what the incremental success points were on that journey, we'd probably really likely fall off. And truthfully, I think if we can create some really solid indicators of success, it can show us like where exactly we need to double our efforts, right? For example, if we're in a position where we start to streamline some of the ways that we're fulfilling, and we notice that it helps us keep customers for longer and we can finish projects quicker, so our capacity becomes larger, that all is a potential profit that can either come back to the owner at the end of the day, or that we can reinvest into the business and reinvest into the team to grow it at scale and gain more customers and more projects and things like that. And so I think if we can start to root this in actual tangible business metrics that are helping us grow over time, it'll help us really quantify and justify an investment of this magnitude. So first and foremost, what we want to do is we want to establish a baseline. And I love using, if you haven't kind of arrived at the process that you'd like to work through specifically for this workshop, I love to use client onboarding as an example. I think client onboarding is a really undervalued mechanism for service businesses, specifically agencies, because ultimately, I mean, there's tons of agencies out there, right? And really what we want to make sure that a client just feels at home when they first transact with us. And unfortunately, buyer's remorse is at the highest in the onboarding process because they've just transacted and they're in a position where they're like, okay, what's next, right? When we have that kind of like Amazon built-in satisfaction system in our brain where we order something and then it just like arrives at our door immediately. But what we want to do is we want to establish a baseline. So let's just use the example of client onboarding. Go take a look at the last couple of projects that you've done and see what the baseline is for how long it takes you to onboard a new client, right? Let's just say, for example, it takes about 10 days, right? What in that 10 days can we take a look at from a procedure perspective, from a systems perspective, from a people perspective, right? That Venn diagram I showed earlier, what can we take a look at to see, okay, are all the bases covered here? Do we have somebody who's on like an onboarding specialist or in charge of onboarding? Do we have a system that we use, right? A place where they all come and they have all of their information, a checklist of sorts that they can access, or some videos that might help them along in the process, or maybe an onboarding form that we use. And then additionally, what is the process, right? From day 1 to day 10, what are the touch points? What is our client responsible for? What are we responsible for? And really get intentional about that, because ultimately what we want to do is we want to onboard our clients and get them results as quickly as possible. If this takes 10 days because you're doing like strategic input and you take like a really solid measurement of how this is going and it looks good to you, then we could measure and improve some outcomes, right? So within the 10 days, if the process looks really good, what kind of outcomes can we get them in that time, right? That we don't traditionally get them. And so the next thing I want you to do is just to create a goal. So let's just say for simplicity's sake that you want to decrease the time it takes to onboard a new client from 10 days to 4 days. Well, that's a pretty big goal and it may take a while, but maybe we could talk through some incremental changes. So by the end of Q1, we want this to take 7 business days or 8 business days, and then just kind of get a little bit better from there. So I think ultimately what we end up doing, especially when we goal set around some of our operational elements, is we miss some of that baseline measurement, and we aren't even collecting the data that we need to be able to make informed decisions about the business. So if we're writing processes and we're measuring the outcomes or the changes that we want to make there, it's really helpful to, again, root this activity into some real tangible measurables and ROI for the business. Because ultimately, if we can shorten our onboarding time, we can likely shorten the overall time it takes for projects. We can shorten the communication or administrative costs back and forth, thus hiring our utilization rate within our agency. It's a ripple effect, and it definitely touches almost every piece of how you're working with clients. And then ultimately, again, you want to just measure this over time. You want to get 1% better every quarter, every month, right? At really delivering high quality, consistent, scalable projects that, you can really feel proud to come back and be like, okay, this is how we can make this better time and time again. And then ultimately just build a process culture, right, into your business, right? If somebody notices as they're onboarding a new client in say month 5, right after you've implemented this process, you could be in a position to take a look at, okay, hey, listen, my onboarding specialist said that, so-and-so actually went a little bit slower through this process, but here's why. And so I think positioning metrics in front of our team not only gives them ownership over what exactly they're responsible for, but it also helps them solve for the other side of the equation. If, for example, the metric comes back and it's not what we want to see, right? It's not what we expected. I have so many times managed teams, and metrics make team management and people management so much easier. Because what we don't want to do is surprise and attack our team when they haven't hit their goals or their metrics. We want this in front of them constantly so that we have, perhaps weekly conversations and 52 chances to iterate, and they see everything in front of, them to know what to change, or perhaps come to you with solutions and ask you for some help and some input on some of those higher watermark things. They also are kept accountable, right, to their team internally. Everybody sees everybody's metrics, and we're taking a look at, overall overall, this team is going after kind of a joint, a joint goal. And ultimately, it'll make them a little bit more bought into the fact that they are going after this together. A frictionless SOP system is just kind of one piece of that. And I hope that this is encouraging. I hope that really getting things documented and centralized is something that you are convinced is a healthy thing for the agency, because ultimately I've seen agencies, really thrive when they have something like this. And I've also seen agencies fall off when they don't have that consistency. They lose talent really quickly. And it's ultimately something that ends up being their downfall. Ultimately, if you want to, I have a bunch of really cool things that are pulled into my operations toolkit over at operationsagency.com. So you can go over to our website /toolkit and grab that for free. If you want to book a call with me, if you want to learn how to really install this frictionless SOP system into your agency, you can go over to operationsagency.com/call and kind of chat through how we can install this into your business. And if you have any questions as you're kind of building out, this SOP specifically for yourself, my hope is that you start with something that's going to immediately get you some time back to focus on some larger initiatives in the business. You can send me an email at Alyson@operationsagency.com.